Good evening and welcome to Tuesday's Encounters in New York. My name is Mark Beecher. I'll be your host tonight. Our special guest tonight is Miss Paris Downing. Paris will speak to us about how language shapes our experience in life. Paris is an accomplished hyperpolyglot. She's a member of IPEA, and so she studies languages, and she's also very interested in language, music, dancing, religion, multi-interests, an extraordinary young lady. So welcome, Paris, and open your microphone.
Hello, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
How are you? It's exciting.
Good. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Okay. So how did you start? What languages do you speak, and how did you learn them?
Great question. I didn't speak any other languages until I was about 11 years old. Et la première langue que j'ai appris, c'était la français. The first language I studied, it was French. Después de esto, yo aprendí el español. After that, I started studying Spanish. After that, I started learning a little bit of ASL, which is American Sign Language. Dopo di questo, ho studiato italiano anche. I studied Italian. Dann in Hochschule, ich habe Deutsch gelernt. In high school, I started speaking German. Og jeg har lært meg å snakke norsk på Duolingo. I taught myself a little bit of Norwegian using Duolingo. 然后我在中学学习中文I took a class in Chinese in high school. Eu também usei Duolingo para aprender o português também. So I started learning Duolingo Portuguese. So lots of languages going on.
And was this a compulsion? You said, I need to learn a new language. I'm a little bored with Chinese, so let me learn something new.
Great question. I find myself to be a very passionate person, but also very easily distracted. And so I end up focusing on one topic for a very long time. So I was very focused on Greek mythology, religion for years at a time. But my interest in there would hop around. And so I can never be satisfied with just learning about one religion, one language, one dance. It has to be everything. So it's just because I like it, honestly. I like studying grammar. I like reading textbooks. I know it's not a normal a normal thing to say, but I enjoy it. And then the connections come along the way. That's really the part that makes it the most fulfilling.
Do you find occasion to use many of these languages?
Yeah, I am actually the leader right now of an exchange group here in Dallas, Texas. And every week we meet up, and whatever language they speak, we try to find some way to work it in. So almost every week we'll get English, French, Spanish, Chinese, and I have them sit at all different tables and chat with each other. And if we get someone who speaks a language that we don't know, we all try to learn it. So we had a bunch of people who spoke Farsi. I don't speak any Farsi, but we all tried to learn that day. So it was a lot of fun.
And a lot of these languages, when you said Farsi, like Arabic and words will escape me, but the Jewish language and Arabic are essentially the same language. Is that correct? Are you familiar with that?
Hebrew and Arabic come from, they're both Semitic languages. So they come from the same root family, but you can understand some words in between, like yad and yot. Yad is hand or arm, yot, hand, arm. But for the most part, you're not going to be able to speak to each other.
Okay. Well, somehow in the Middle East, they managed to understand each other, I hope. Do you learn language by phonetics?
I
or
do actually. So for me, the most important thing I start with is usually pronunciation because since a lot of the resources I use are books, it's very important to know what am I reading? What is this going to sound like when I actually speak it? So I use something called IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, and that'll tell you exactly how every single sound in any word in any language should be pronounced. So it's very useful for linguists, for singers, for anyone who wants to say things in other languages.
right. Are you I know I'm familiar with several families where the parents have immigrated to the United States, so they speak English as well as their native language, and their children basically speak English, but they understand the native language. So the parent will speak to them in a native language, and the children just respond in English, and it's all automatic. There's no lapse of time to translate. It's all just automatic, and I always found that very interesting. Um,
Hmm.
when you switch from one language to another, do you find you have to translate, or is it just come into your brain?
It depends on the language. If it's something that I'm very fluent in, like French or Spanish, it's just boom on the spot. It just goes. But if it's something that is a bit harder, Chinese, Arabic, that's definitely going to take more time. But I'm always very impressed when I meet these second, third generation people who can speak the language. Um it's something amazing. Everyone has different levels of fluency, but it's no less of a miracle, whoever does it.
What is the obstacles that we many of us faced in learning a new language?
Hmm. It's so funny. So people compare languages. They say like, "Oh, Spanish is easy, Chinese is hard." I don't think there's a single easy language out there. And you might argue and say for an English speaker, maybe something like Norwegian, Swedish is easier, but if you look at like the grammar for Spanish, I if you want to
Right,
get good at it, it takes a long time. So between understanding the grammar, if that's the path you want to go. A lot of people just learn through listening, and I'm very jealous of that. That is not a
yeah,
talent I have. Some people, you're gonna have to know a lot of vocabulary. That's a problem. And pronunciation, you have to be able to speak clearly enough to be understood by native speakers, which a lot of people don't think of that. And then they get into the country and they're like, all my English speaking friends understand me. How come nobody here can?
right.
The accent can be quite a problem. So it's a lot to juggle.
Um, of course, and I was thinking about just in the English language, the vowels and the consonants, um, and just the enunciation on them and how that transfers or makes it more or less difficult to transfer to a new language, like just the A being an A in Spanish, or
Mhm.
just those little differences in enunciation, which the native speaker is going to look at you and
Mm.
say, "We don't understand what you're saying." Um, are English vowels translating to other languages? Is that an easier concept,
I don't
or
know if you can so much as just translate a sound. If you're trying to get like a
hmm,
certain accent, you might have certain ways of going about it. I'm trying to think of I can't unless it's like a loan word. So you take a word from another language, like in French, you have the expression je ne sais quoi, and you're not going to say that as an English speaker. You'll say it has a little, je ne sais quoi. You know, it's the same sounds, but you add your accent to it. But in the case of having an accent, I find a lot of times it's the little vowels that give us away. Vowels have to be very
mhm.
precise, and for English speakers, our vowels are very obvious. Our vowels move in all these different directions that is not common for most languages. So that tends to be the number one thing that makes us stand out when we go abroad.
Well, even where you are now, moving from New Jersey to Texas, uh, is there a difference in the understanding of I mean, there are different word. Well, there's one word that sounds much different in regions of the United States. Um, I know, like a mop or a map, and it
Mm-hmm.
comes out entirely different in different. And I know in our group here, from being from various different Spanish-speaking countries, they have to be very careful sometimes that something that they say is not insulting to the other person because it's slightly different meanings in different countries. Um, so, uh, and okay, when you say conversational, um, that's like conversational off of Duolingo.
So there's different levels of conversation. So at the bare basic, I studied Polish for a month and I went to the country and I was able to buy food, buy the things I need, get around, ask for directions. But I would not consider that like I guess it's conversational, but I wouldn't really say like, oh yes, I'm
Right,
conversational in Polish, you know. If I'm conversational, I want it to be at a point where I can talk about a wide variety of topics. So if I like talking about dancing, I want to be able to talk about dancing in my other language. If I like talking about religions, I want to be able to talk about religions. So you'll find a lot of the language community tends to talk about travel and culture. Those are the two most interesting ones.
right, because that's when you learn a new language, you want to travel.
Definitely.
You want to go to that country. Um, how what is well besides probably Chinese, what are the more difficult languages? Is like would you think
Mhm.
Russian is a different language difficult or
So there's actually a rating system, and they do it for English speakers because obviously, if you're a native Spanish speaker, Portuguese is not going to be as hard for you as it's going to be for someone who speaks English. So
right?
languages at the bottom, this will be like level one, easiest are going to be Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Indonesian. Indonesian's there because even though it's very different from our own, there's no verb conjugations, there's like a nice simple word order. It's a very nice language. Up one, I don't remember if I already said German, but this level is for like just German. German is the only language in this level because it takes a little bit more time to learn than a normal level one language. Level three is where you're going to find your bulk of your languages. So this is your Russian, your Greek, um, your Zulu, your like just a bunch of languages that are like, oh yes, those are obviously hard. There's a lot of them. Most languages are probably going to fall into a level three. Up next, you have things that are harder. So this is going to be your Chinese, your Arabic, your Vietnamese, and then at the tippy top is Japanese. So Japanese has officially been ranked the hardest in the world. You heard it
Okay.
here first.
Well, I know their alphabet is maybe the hardest in the world. I wasn't so sure about the language. Um, and the one group, and maybe you pronounce it for me, the group that meets about the hyperpolyglots and
Hypia. Hmm.
Hypia. Um, so people that you've met in Hypia, what would be the average number of languages they?
I would say on average it's a good like 10 to 12. Um, there are some that get by with just I think the minimum is six that you have to be. You have to either be like really fluent in six or conversational and a lot more than that as you go up. But people are really talented. They pull out a lot of interesting ones. But for the most part, you'll see everyone is probably doing like a French, Spanish, Chinese. That tends to be the main thing you see in polyglot. So in that respect, I'm not the most special polyglot out there.
Um, and how do these languages shape our experience? Um, is some languages more creative, more literal? Um,
Oh, well, that's the
Just,
question we're here to ask today.
yes.
I have a whole presentation ready on it whenever you
Oh,
are.
all right, we're ready.
Awesome. Let's see. I can share my screen. And let's do this. So, welcome to my PowerPoint. Uh, so when I was introducing myself, you probably heard many different languages. Tu as écouté que quand je parle en français, il fluye très bien. Y cuando yo hablo en español, es con más energía, más voz. So I have a lot of different sounds. So you can probably guess that already a little bit of different personalities come out in each language. And the question of the day is really, does that hold true for the way we see the world? Do different languages give us a different perspective that someone who's just learning the language could never get? Um, no, I'm not going to give you spoilers. You're going to find out for yourself. So let's dive on in. So you will hear this in linguistics termed as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So Edward Sapir was a linguist from Germany. He also studied ethnology, which is comparing different cultures in different places and different time periods. And it was mostly, he mostly thought that humans perceive the world principally through language. The thing that's interesting is even though he had this idea, most of the time when he was writing, he was not for this. He did not 100% agree that languages shape the way we see the world. This other man, Benjamin Whorf, came a little bit after him and was very much on board. He was so excited. He says, languages shape the way we see and determine everything. And I'm going to coin the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. They had never, ever worked on a paper together. But he just felt like they had enough in common that he could name it after them. And so whenever you see Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, think linguistic determinism, how people see the world. So I want to touch on three different areas. First is grammar. So that's kind of the structure, how we put sentences together, just word order, all that kind of stuff. Vocabulary, so that's words, phrases, vocab, things that are more local to a certain language. And then finally, culture. So that's going to be the part we dive into first because it can be some of the funnest. So depending on where you go, you're going to see different greetings all over the world. If you are in the United States, you're probably used to waving hi to someone, shaking someone's hand. If you're in South America, you'll probably give someone one kiss on the cheek. If you're in Europe, that can be anywhere from 2 to 4. 2 is the most common. If you're in Russia, it can be straight on the lips. And then, of course, on the other side of the world, bowing is very common. Sometimes you can do namaste hands. Sometimes it's straight at the waist. So, and one thing that's interesting too is in Japanese culture, the person to bow first is the person who is younger, but the person who wants to show more respect is the person who bows the lowest. So if you are someone who's a bit older and you're talking to an 18-year-old Japanese emperor, he's going to bow first, but you're going to bow lower to show respect. So this is one way that's different. You can see that in some places they'll be like, oh, she didn't kiss me hello, I'm so offended. But you could very easily translate that to, oh, he didn't wave hello to me, he didn't hug me hello. Something must be wrong. So it really is, at the end of the day, just another way to say hello. So whether you consider that something that's different or not, it's up to you. Next, we have holidays. So I like to break holidays down into two different kinds. I would break them into, one is very spiritual days. They're very much days of meditation, just gathering together. I would say something like any day that you're really like praying, like maybe Thanksgiving in the US. It's not really praying, but it's very much a day of thanks, and you're getting with your family, you're thinking about your values. That's a very calm kind of holiday. And then you have your crazy holidays, the ones that all those years ago made people want to convert from their local religions into Christianity. So you have stuff like Carnival, April Fool's Day, days that are more about celebrating, just enjoying life and having a quick break from routine. So we all have these holidays and we all have like a different splattering of both kinds of holidays. So at the end of the day, this is just one more thing we have in common. You might say, oh, well, they do it differently. They have incense, they serve wine, but we're all celebrating the same thing more or less. Another important thing, it doesn't really fall into the holidays category, but major life events. So up here in this top corner, we have a young man in Vanuatu, which is an island in Oceania. And for his coming of age, what he has to do is tie bungee cords, well, technically ropes, lianas around his ankles, and then jump from this really rickety looking wooden thing. And once he does that and he survives, that's his coming of age day. And he can say, I am no longer a boy, I am a man. We have a funeral over here. I picked a Jewish funeral because one thing that's unique about it is you have to be buried within 24 hours of when you die. So everyone just drops what they're doing and comes to support this person in such an extreme time. Over here we have a birthday. I picked a Korean birthday because in Korea, everyone celebrates their birthday on New Year's Eve. So whether you were born on January 2nd or December 29th, you're all going to celebrate it the same day. So everyone will be 1 year old, even if they have a whole year apart for age. And then there's some religions that don't even celebrate birthdays. You have Jehovah's Witness, who they believe the only holidays you should celebrate are those about God. And birthdays kind of take away from that, so they don't even do that. Over here we have an Indian wedding, and just like with our weddings, they dress up, they want to look the best. It's a lot about art, it's about just being your most stunning self. Even if it does last from anywhere from 3 to 7 days, it's still about embracing that new part of your life with a new person. This one down here is particularly sad. This is in Japan. This is a shrine to unborn children. So parents who have lost a child will come here and they'll knit hats for these little children, statues of little children. And it's a way of either saying, please take care of my kids in the next life, or take care of my kids in this life. Like, I want my kids to grow up strong. So it's a very powerful image because even though we don't really have anything like that in the US, I don't think there's anyone in the world who can say they don't understand a parent's loss when they go through something like that. It's a universal feeling. And then to the right of it, we have a baptism, which is a way of saying welcome into the world, welcoming a baby into a community, and just showing a child you have a lot of support, you have a whole community that takes care of you. Now, why go into such detail about all of these events? Ooh, wrong button. This actually closely follows Erik Erikson's stages of development. So Erik Erikson was into psychology, and he had this belief that different stages of life have to ask themselves different questions. So if you're an infant, your main question in life is going to be, do I trust these people that I'm with? Will they give me food and water and shelter? Once you get into the toddler stage, you might say, is it okay to be me? Am I allowed to do what I do? Or is it going to be my parents who are always going to make these decisions? If you're a preschooler, it's going to be about guilt. So this is be what I be, do what I do. When you get to a school age student, it's a lot about inferiority. Am I good enough? Can I be okay? Am I an acceptable person? When you're a young adolescent, anyone who has teenage kids, there's a lot of role confusion. Who am I? What am I supposed to do in this world? What is my purpose here? You get into young adult stage. It's a lot about intimacy versus isolation. So am I going to find someone who loves and cares for me, or am I going to spend my life alone? And then you get into middle age. This is about productivity or stagnation. So, am I doing enough? Am I being enough? This is why you see a lot of people have midlife crises. It's about just am I helping? And then finally, lastly is did I do enough with my life, or is it time to despair? Did I accomplish everything I wanted to do? And if you look back at all these events, these important events in life, even though we might not celebrate the same events, you can see that for this boy doing land diving, it's a coming of age. So it's about like role confusion. It's child to adult. He's now a man. At funeral, it's a lot about coming together. Like, what do we do with this tragedy? Did this person do enough with his life? If we all gather here, maybe we can show that yes, this was a person who had value. For birthdays, it's just about taking care of you, making sure that you feel individual, unique. That can impact any age. Marriages, all about isolation versus love. Once again, about loss, about community, about coming together. And this is about bringing someone new into the world. So you're showing the baby, and the baby's not going to be able to understand, but the baby can say, "Oh, I have a community. This community will support me, will look after me, will protect me." So you really can see that no matter where you go, all over the world, everyone goes through these same things. So that was the cultural half. Now we're going to dive into the grammar half. So why is it that, or I guess back to the fundamental question, do different languages make us think or feel differently? We look at culture. Culture is different in different places, but overall we feel the same. Does grammar have anything linking to making us feel different? So different languages speak in different orders. If you speak English and Spanish and French and Portuguese, this is all going to be, I like pizza. This is probably one of the most common ones out there. If you are speaking something like Japanese, Korean, Latin, I pizza like. So your verb will always go at the end of the sentence. And then a lot of these are a lot less common. I see in Chinese, you might say something like pizza, I like. But that's definitely not the most common. And just to show you what languages speak what, I found this nifty map so you can see what is most common. So our language, English, falls in red. I believe the second most common one, which is I pizza like, that is yellow. And then it just goes down from there. So tons of languages. And so you would think that that would do something to the way that people see the world. Like if I'm saying I like pizza and you're saying I pizza like, that's probably going to have a little bit of an impact on you. But surprisingly, it can change some things, but overall the message is still the same. Now what do we do about all these gray dots down here? The deal with the gray dots is they say no dominant order. How could that be? How could it be that there's no word order? That doesn't make any sense. We'll get to that in a bit. Before then, I wanted to show some kind of funny things that having a different word order can do. So this long German sentence will definitely do the trick. I have yesterday in the middle of a green field in a park next to a tall tree under the warm sun with my friend had a car accident. So the main action really happens all the way at the end. You have to wait until the end of the sentence to get to the meat of it. But while it's going through all that other stuff, it's very descriptive. You can imagine the field and the park and the tree and the sun. Like it all paints a beautiful scenery before telling you what happened there. So German is very interesting that way. And you can say the sign language is also the same too. I have a video, which is sign language poetry, and it's called Caterpillar. See if you can guess why. And no, there's no sound.
No veo Mark.
You don't see it?
I'm sorry, what?
You can see the video, right?
Oh, yeah, yes, yes.
Oh, okay, good. So none of you need to speak sign language to understand what's going on there. You saw a little caterpillar crawl up, make a chrysalis, and emerge as a beautiful butterfly. Now you might say, wow, that is a whole nother way of communicating that spoken languages can't do. But really at the end of the day, there were very few signs. There was blink, there was grow, there was storm, but there wasn't a lot of signing. So that kind of it's kind of iffy to say, is this really language showing us a new method of communication, or is this more of acting? So people are still on the fence about that one.
Right,
Next,
it's a
yeah.
visual thing, but it's
Mhm.
interpretive also. It's like interpretive dance.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very debatable whether it's different, whether this proves like, oh, there's some languages, there's not something intrinsic that makes it unique. It might just be that this is dance, this is art, and that is something entirely different from language. So you can see the line starts to get a little bit blurry. One other honorable mention. So not all languages are spoken. We saw sign language. There's also whistling languages out there. So if you're in the Canary Islands, the second largest island, La Gomera, and you want to say hello, you might say, Buenos dias. And it's pretty nifty. It's a great thing to do. They've taken brain scans of people who whistle to communicate, and they actually process whistling as a language, which is very different than how you or me might process it. And it's so much to the point that there's also a whistling language in France. And during World War II, when the Germans were invading, they would whistle to each other, hide the illegal goods. And the Germans never caught on because they didn't realize that whistling could be a language. And so that town was spared. But at the end of the day, really, every single whistling language out there is just a variation on a spoken language. So they don't really have their own unique grammar. They don't really have their own unique vocab. So it kind of falls into the category of codes. It's not really its own unique thing. It's going to make you see whistling in a new way, but it's not going to make you see language in a new way. Another thing that's funky is so we have that question before about why are all those languages gray? How could it be that they have no word order? So in a lot of languages, like in English, word order is very strict. It's on the table. You can't say ta on the table, it's that would be weird. And it's the same thing in Spanish. Está en la mesa. You can't say en la mesa está. You could, but you might get some funny looks. In Hindi, they have post positions, which means you don't say on the table, you say table on. Wo mez padhe. And this is that IPA I was telling you about earlier. It lets you read phonetically. And lastly, for Pashto, they have something called an add position. So typically they'll use post positions, but sometimes they'll do both before and after. Da pamiz kaide. So he, she, it, at, table, on, is. Now, languages like Latin are a lot more fluid. You can put things in any order, and that's not going to change anything. So how could it be that the girl sees the dog is different than the dog sees the girl? That's kind of like the main point of English. Well, they changed the endings of words. So normally you would say puela for girl, puela cantat. If you want to say of the girl, hueste es puelai, you have to change the ending. If you want to say I see the girl, puelam video, which you could also say video puelam, I see the girl. And no matter how you phrase it, it's always going to mean the same thing. And then lastly, cum puella locur. I speak with the girl, which is the same thing as locur cum puella. So, and then there's a lot of wonderful languages out there like German and Arabic and Russian, Ukrainian, who decide to use both. So they have both prepositions and cases, which makes it it can make it confusing, but it can also make it easier because, as you can see, you can be a little bit more flexible with the word order. So you would think that once again, the way you word things would change it, but really it might not at the end of the day because all these things, you can still translate them into English. And so it might sound more poetic, but it's not really doing anything to the meaning. Another thing to look at is the word of. Who thinks about the word of? I don't know, me. So we have both variations in English. We have both of and this apostrophe S, like the cat, the girl's cat versus the clothes of the girl. So in a lot of languages, French, Spanish, Latin, Ukrainian, Arabic, we all have it's going to be usually the object that comes first and then the person it belongs to second. So la casa de mi amiga is the house of my friend. And then all these honorable mentions down here, boy, are there a lot. But the same thing over here. So mein Bruder's Freundin, my brother's girlfriend. So you just add an S, they don't even use an apostrophe, and it can mean the same thing. 我的朋友, watashi no tomodachi. Like all these things have the person first and then the thing that belongs to them second. So, but at the end of the day, they really mean the same thing. It's two different ways to get to the same answer. So while to us English speakers, it's going to sound weird to say the clothes of the girl, you would want to say the girl's clothes. Um, different languages have their own preference, and it doesn't really impact meaning that much. It's not some hidden secret, which is really at the end of the day what we're looking for. Now here is an interesting one. This is so far the best piece of evidence I have come across for different languages mean seeing the world in different ways. So in Australia, there are a ton of Aboriginal languages. This little circle up here, and sorry for butchering the pronunciation because this is actually one I haven't studied. This language up here is Gugu Yimithir, and all over here are a bunch of Paman languages, including Kuk Thayor. And what's interesting about these languages is instead of saying to the left, to the right, they say north, south, east, west. And it's not like this is north. You have to memorize at all times which way is north. You always will know. And so if I want to say, oh, grab that pencil that's to the southeast of you, we'll know what pencil to get. And the trickiest thing is when they're saying hello to each other, it's not hello, it's what direction are you headed in? And then you have to say where you're going. So you better know because this is something a 5-year-old could do. And I think anyone here in the group would probably struggle to do that. If you asked me where north is, I don't know. So it can be a little tricky. But this means that when they're putting things in order, so let's say I have a picture of a man when he's young and then he's a bit older, older. We always do left to right. If you're speaking Arabic, you might do right to left. If you are speaking these Paman languages, you're going to do it from east to west. So if you are looking towards the south, you're going to put it, I believe, right to left. If you're looking from the south, you're going to put it. Oh, I can't even get my directions clear enough to do it. It takes a lot of brain power, but this is something if you ask any 5-year-old in this land, they will just be able to do it.
Right.
So that is pretty convincing evidence that there is some kind of knowledge out there that we as speakers of other languages don't have. But if you were to take an English speaker, drop them in there, they would learn it. So it's not like this is something that is just impossible to do. It just takes some learning. Let's see. Another one that is even more fascinating is called evidentials. So you can't just say you can't just say my wife is pregnant. You have to say my wife is pregnant, and I know because I see it. I know because I hear it. I know because my friend told me. I know because I saw her belly. You have to say exactly how you know this, and if you get it wrong, it's considered a lie. So let's say there's camels walking in the sand. Do you know because you saw their footprints, which is visual? Or do you know because you saw them, which is visual? Do you know because you heard them, but you didn't see them? Do you know because you saw evidence of them, so their foot tracks? Do you know because somebody told you? Hearsay. And they have 30 or so different endings that you can put onto your verbs to say how you know this. So it's very strict, and it's so much about telling the truth that if this husband were to walk away and they asked him, how many kids do you have? He would have to say three, last time I checked. If he doesn't say last time I checked, well, then he could be lying because you never know if his wife gave birth, if one passed
Yeah.
away, if they all ran off. So you have to be very clear about how you know this information. Um, this is a fun one. I think we have passed officially into vocabulary. So we looked through grammar, and there's definitely a lot of weird things out there. But it's not so weird that we can't understand it, because even though we don't speak the language, we still kind of understand how it works. So let's see if there's anything vocab-wise that cannot be translated. First, when we're counting in numbers, we obviously have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. This is called base 10 because every 10 numbers, we give it a new name. Now, if you were in France, you have your normal 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. But then suddenly, when they get up to 60, they decide to make it a base 20 language, which means every 20 numbers you get a new name. So 70 is 20 plus 10, 80 is 4 times 20, 90 is 4 times 20 plus 10, and finally we get back to 100. If you are speaking Danish, it gets even more complicated. We got 10, 20, 30, 40 like normal, and then we start getting into decimal points. So 2.5 times 20, that's 50. 3 times 20, that's 60. All the way up until 100 is normal again. So Danish people must be good with math or something.
Yeah.
Um, but it's funny because when they speak in normal conversation, it's just something you memorize. So I would know in French, 80, that's just 80. You don't always say, oh, I have a 4, carry the 1, make that a 20. Oh, it's 80. No, I just memorize 80, that's 80. Same thing with Danish. You're not going to sit around doing math all day. You know what the word is. It's just it comes from a very funny place. And last we have Piraha, which is a language that's spoken in the jungles in Brazil. They are a language that also has a very good case for this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. They don't have any numbers. They just have small number or big number. And so they did a study to see, like, is this just 1 and 2? Is this just few and many? Like, what are they trying to do? And so they had them count up from 1 to 10. They would place a stick in front of them. So this is 1, and they would say small. And then they say 2, and they would say small. 3, small. 4, small. 5, big number, big number. And they would do that all the way up until 10. And then when they got to 10 sticks, they would start taking them away. So 9, big number. 8, big number. 7, big number. All the way down till 4. And finally they said small number. So it's not like an exact thing. It's not going to be like, oh, 4 is exactly where we stop, depending on whether you're going up, depending on whether you're going down. It's just small number, big number. And that means that if you give them like a group of bunnies and you say, hey, give me as many goats as I have bunnies, they might not give you the exact same number because it's all about like, oh, small number, big number. It's just
Right.
an average. So that is another good reason that possibly this Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is true. Colors. Colors are a fun one. So back in ancient Greece, this is the color palette we were working with. You may notice there is no blue. The closest thing we have is this like greenish, grayish thing. And so when they're describing the sea, they'll say on a stormy day, oh, it was wine red, wine purple. If it's a clear day, they might say it's gray, like somebody's eyes. If it's what else? The sky might be like a more of a white color, just light. So they didn't have a word for blue. Does that mean that ancient people didn't see blue? They didn't know what it was? Were they colorblind or something? No, because Russian actually has two different colors. They have siny and holuboy. Although, if I'm butchering it, it's because I've been working on Ukrainian a lot recently. So sorry about that. But does that mean that we don't see the difference between those two colors? No, we clearly see it's a dark blue and a light blue. We don't differentiate them as two colors, but Russian does. However, once again, Piraha comes back to save the day. They have no words for colors. They only have dark or light. So this would be considered dark, dark, light. So maybe it is more relative. Maybe not every language is going to have the same base things. It's hard to say. Another one is family members. If you speak Chinese, Vietnamese, there's going to be a lot of different names depending on, for brothers, you have two words. If one is older than you, he's a ge. If he's younger than you, he's a didi. And then you have different words for grandparents depending on if they're paternal or maternal. So grandpa on your father's side would be yeah, and on your mother's side, wai gong. Does this mean that English speakers don't know all this stuff? No, you could easily just ask, oh, maternal or paternal grandpa. But most of the time, we don't really care about the difference between white pole and nai nai. So it's just one more thing that if we need to understand, we can ask for it, but it's not something that's as important to us. We don't particularly care if it's mom's older cousin's brother's sister. So, and then another one, you'll see a lot of Spanish speakers here know this. We have tú and usted. And I guess in other countries, you might have vos, vosotros, ustedes, sprinkle a lot of stuff in there. But just because we don't have usted or tú in English, a very polite form, usted, a very informal one, tú, doesn't mean we don't understand it. In fact, in Old English or Middle English, we used to use, or even modern English, but a little bit earlier, we had you is formal and informal is thou. So thou art a good person is actually a casual way of saying you're a good person. So it exists. It existed at one point in English, and even if we don't have it now, we still have the capacity to understand it. And then it gets even crazier in Vietnamese. So if you are speaking to someone who's 3 generations older than you, the word for you is ong, as long as he's a guy. If it's a girl, you say ba. And then if you are a grandfather's age and you're speaking to someone 3 generations younger than you, you'll say con. But depending on who you're speaking to, you're going to have a different word for you and I. And it's all, it's a lot to remember. But at the end of the day, we still understand it. We don't use it. It might take a lot of studying because that's not something we're used to. But we can still understand it. So I don't think that necessarily qualifies as Sapir-Whorf things that are so out of our range of understanding. One thing that I'm sure everyone has thought of by now is gender. So French, Spanish, they all have masculine and feminine. German has male, female, and neuter. And so does Norwegian, Swedish, Danish. But gender actually has nothing to do with like an actual human's gender. So the way gender came about is we had all these words that fit into one category, all these words that fit into another category. So we might say something like die Uhr. Why is it always like die Uhr? What can we use to describe that? Well, we also use the word die for Frau, a woman. So maybe let's just call all of these words female and all of these words male. And that's how you end up with a situation where das Fraulein, a little girl, can be neuter, and Kvinnen, a woman, can be male. So nothing to do with gender at all. Now, there was a study a while ago that was saying, depending on what language you speak, you're going to describe certain words in a different way. So if you take the word bridge, a German speaker will say, oh, it is very sturdy and strong and fortified. And a Spanish speaker might say, oh, a bridge is very beautiful and well designed and it's very pretty to look at. But unfortunately, the study that did this was not actually proven. So it was never a published study, and there has not been any ability to replicate it. So we don't actually have any scientific proof that that is the case. In fact, what they found is some of these words that they describe as more male, they sometimes use as more female. So somebody might describe the bridge as valuable, and in one example, they'll say, oh, that's an example of a male word. And in another, they said valuable, and they said it was female. So not exactly the best science. Ooh, now here is another really good try at showing that different languages think differently. So if you're speaking in Spanish, you're not going to say, I broke the vase. You're going to say, the vase broke itself. Or the vase just broke magically. I don't know how it happened. And they did a study that showed that in languages where, in Spanish, they said, who's at fault? And a lot less of the time, they would say the person standing nearby is at fault. And meanwhile, for English speakers, if they said, I broke the vase, they would say, oh, well, obviously it's that person's fault. But they did a second study and they found that when you word it a little bit differently, so for this situation, um for the speaker, they said the vase was broken by me or I broke the vase. And in this situation, you can see it's pretty similar. And in this situation, they said the vase broke itself or the vase was broken. And so in this situation, they said it was less likely that the person blamed it. You can see there's a little bit of discrepancy for English speakers because we worded it differently. It entirely changed, but for the most part, it's the same. So you can't 100% say that this idea of blaming people is something that is inherently English, only we do it. And then finally, this is really the best way to wrap this all up. So we have all these wonderful phrases from all these languages, and people are always saying this is something that's untranslatable. But at the end of the day, even something like hyggelig, that's just one word in Norwegian, and Norwegians are very proud to say, "Oh, that's not something you have in English. It's happy, but it's like a happiness you get when you're sitting by the fire with your family and you're very warm and cozy." Well, you just described it. That's not something that's untranslatable. What we're looking for to prove Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is it has to be something that cannot be translated. Only people that speak that language understand it. You might say again, l'esprit d'escalier. Oh, it's so beautiful. The spirit of the stairs. This is when you're walking away from a fight and you're thinking about everything you could have said to that person. Well, you just explained it. Even if it is a little bit more idiomatic, it's still something that can be translated. So at the end of the day, I personally don't think there's a lot of evidence to say you can, like, people think differently, but not so much that things cannot be untranslatable. And you can even see this with Algonquin. So everyone always says, oh, Eskimos have 100 different words for snow, which is a bit of an exaggeration. But some examples are aput, snow on the ground, konna, falling snow, piksirpok, drifting snow, kimuksuk, snow drift. But what's interesting is they have found as many different versions for snow as we have for water. We have rivers, we have lakes, we have ponds, we have streams. We have so many different words for water, and we don't consider it like that. I'm sure the Algonquins would look at us and say, you guys are weird. Why do you need so many words for water? So at the end of the day, it's a little bit hard to say whether something is if somebody really is thinking in a different way, or if it's just something that with a little bit of help we can get there too. So that concludes my presentation.
Okay, very good. Now I just had a few questions.
Yeah, ask
Probably in
away.
the what happened here? Probably in the last 50 to 75 years, English has been expanding greatly throughout the world, probably just because of business and commerce. Um, and I think at this point, it's probably the number one language in the world. Every country, even though they have their own language, it would also, because of the commerce, they learn how to speak English so that they can trade with the world. But your group that meets, I guess, on a regular basis, the Hippia.
Yep.
And I was just thinking when you were talking about some of the different countries, like slang. I think slang
Mm-hmm.
is spreading around the world more quickly, much rapidly. Something, um,
Yeah.
particularly in the hip hop world and things, when they develop new words, then within a year it's fully gone around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I had one question. I don't know if the group is familiar with this. Uh, Probably about 60 or 70 years ago, they tried to develop what they called the Earth language. It'd be universal. Uh,
Mm.
and it became known as Esperanto, but it never really got any traction around the world, I guess. Maybe a few people are interested in it, but it never took off to say, and it would be such a great idea if everybody in the world spoke the same language. Um, but it never happened. And I think it's, just because of so many things about how their language, nobody's willing to give up their language in favor of
Mm-hmm.
something that's just currently produced. But
Yeah,
I
it's
don't know if there's
definitely a very interesting situation. There are more than 1 million speakers of Esperanto right now.
right.
So it's hard to say it's necessarily a failed language, but I know
Oh,
it's not as many as some others. But I know that because English is here, a lot of people are just going to default to English, that ended up being what we all spoke anyway.
right. Um, but even in terms of if there's 1 million speakers, they're just doing it as something that they find enjoyable. They're not doing it necessarily because that's going to help them in life.
Hmm.
Um, and because it's more of a curiosity at this point. Um, and I don't know if you have any knowledge of the language that we are transmitting from Earth out into the universe for any other civilizations to pick up.
I
Is
believe
there
it's
you
math, right? Math and music.
math? I know it's math. I didn't know if there were any other language involved.
I
Because
believe we
math
sent them
is,
up some famous composers as well.
yeah. Yeah, and we do it continually, I guess, so that just in the happens chance that somebody hears it, they may be able to equate it. It was like um, the one little video that you ran where with the caterpillar and everything.
Hmm.
You're sending a message that everybody must understand, regardless of the language. At least they can interpret to say, okay, we
Hmm.
don't know what a caterpillar is, but we know there's something happening here,
Yeah,
and I can,
absolutely. I think it's fascinating. I definitely need to look more into it because there's all sorts of ideas and hypotheses about what level aliens will be at if they are out there.
right. um so what's your future plans in your linguistic career?
Oh, good question. Well, right now I just started I'm in the process of completing my certification for becoming a Spanish teacher. So
Okay.
that is why I worked a little bit of pedagogy into the presentation. And I'm very excited. I cannot wait. It's been a long time coming that I have a job that is centered around languages.
Okay, so you're going to teach language
Hmm.
at what level?
Middle school.
Middle school. Okay. Uh, in in Texas, well, I guess probably getting about close to 50% of people in Texas that speak Spanish at this point.
It's a
I would think.
surprising amount. We
Yeah,
constantly have people that come in and speak Spanish, and there's a lot more that don't know it and want to learn it.
yeah.
It's very interesting. I want to go back to you asked me a question earlier about the Texas accent, I believe,
Yeah.
about the vocab. It's very interesting living here. So for the most part, the people are coming from all over the country. Everyone wants to be in Texas. So the youth, for the most part, they speak like Northerners. They speak like me.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of old timers there who will still continue to speak with the Texas accent, which is actually different from the rest of the Deep South. They have a completely different accent. And they have different culture, different customs. So for them, you must say sir, ma'am, and if someone were to say sir or ma'am to me in the north, I think I would be a little suspicious. I might be offended. Like, what do you mean, ma'am?
Yeah.
Well, what are you trying to get out of me? You know, it's not something we do up here culturally. So it's very different. It really is sometimes like being in another country.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know much about Texas other than what I read about the politics in Texas, and it's
Mm,
alarming.
yeah.
Um, so we have other people on the line. Does anybody have questions for Paris? We caught them off guard because we normally do this on Tuesday. So
It's okay. Well, if they have questions, I believe we're posting where to find me. That should be all in the information we put out. So.
okay, so very good. It's always interesting. It's an interesting topic to think about, to discuss. We appreciate your information. Your presentation was very good. So,
And I appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you all for being such an amazing audience.
um, so I think that will be it for tonight. And join us next Tuesday for another conversation on Tuesday at 7 New York time. Oh, okay.
Aw, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.